I've been teaching at the West Point Military Academy for 12 years, and I can spot trouble from 3 hallways away.
Swagger walks differently than confidence.
Arrogance has its own particular stench, like old socks and unearned privilege mixed together in a locker room that hasn't seen fresh air since the Clinton administration.
But, Lieutenant Sarah Chen? She didn't register on any of my usual radars.
She appeared in the faculty lounge on a Tuesday morning like steam rising from coffee, quietly, without announcement, just suddenly, there. Small hands wrapped around a regulation mug, dark hair pulled back in a bun so tight it could have been regulation issued.
Everything about her whispered regulation.
Everything except her eyes. Her eyes had seen things.
I'm not proud of what happened next. 12 years of teaching 19-year-old testosterone factories had calcified certain assumptions in my brain.
When Colonel Morrison introduced her as our new advanced combat tactics instructor, my first thought was, they're really scraping the bottom of the barrel now. My second thought, she looks like she should be teaching elementary school art, not hand-to-hand combat.
My third thought, the one that makes my stomach twist even now, this should be entertaining. Christ, I was an ass. Gentlemen, Morrison announced to the room of coffee-clutching instructors, meet Lieutenant Chen. She'll be taking over advanced tactics from Patterson.
He paused, scanning our faces with the practiced eye of a man who'd spent 30 years reading room dynamics. She comes to us with considerable field experience.
Considerable field experience.
The phrase hung in the air like smoke from a cheap cigar.
Jenkins, our hand-to-hand combat specialist, looked up from his newspaper.
6'4", 240 pounds of muscle and military mustache, Jenkins had been breaking grown men for sport since before Chen was born. His eyes traveled from her face to her feet and back again, the way you might measure a child for a Halloween costume. "Ma'am," he said, the word carrying just enough emphasis to make it sound like an insult disguised as respect.
She nodded.
One crisp movement of her chin.
No smile. No attempt to win us over with charm or explanations. Just acknowledgement. Wilson, who taught weapons systems, snorted into his coffee. Actually snorted, like a pig discovering truffles. Advanced combat tactics, huh? What's her specialty? Administrative paperwork. I want to say I stepped in. That 12 years of watching young people navigate impossible situations had taught me empathy. That I recognized the casual cruelty in Wilson's voice and shut it down. I didn't. I sat there, nursing my coffee and my assumptions, watching this small woman absorb our collective skepticism like a sponge absorbing spilled milk. Part of me was curious about what Morrison meant by field experience. Part of me was already composing the email I'd send to my wife later. You won't believe who they stuck us with now. The worst part? Chen didn't react. Not to Wilson's snort. Not to Jenkins's visual inspection. Not to the way conversation resumed around her as if she'd already been dismissed. She stood there, mug in hand, absorbing our casual disregard with the patience of someone who'd been underestimated before. She'd been underestimated by people far more dangerous than us. Your first class is Thursday, Morrison told her. Advanced Tactics, Building C, Room 305. 18 cadets, mostly third and fourth years. Understood, sir. Her voice matched everything else about her, quiet, controlled, regulation perfect. No hint of nerves. No attempt to assert herself or stake claim to territory. If someone had told me she was a secretary who'd wandered into the wrong meeting, I would have believed them. Morrison left. The room settled back into its usual morning rhythm, complaints about administrative bullshit, gossip about cadet drama, the eternal quest for decent coffee in a place that considered caffeine a controlled substance. Chen remained standing by the coffee station, mug in hand, like she was waiting for permission to exist in our space. So, Jenkins said, not looking up from his paper, what kind of field experience we talking about? Logistics? Communications? Filing? The question hung in the air like a challenge. I watched her face. Watched for the telltale signs of someone about to crack under pressure, the tightening around the eyes, the defensive hunch of shoulders, the rapid blinking that screamed I don't belong here and, we all know it. Nothing. She took a sip of coffee.
Set the mug down with the kind of precision that makes you realize someone has trained every movement to be economical.
No wasted motion. No unnecessary sound.
Infantry, she said. The word landed like a stone dropped in still water.
Wilson laughed.
Actually laughed, the sound bouncing off the concrete walls like a rubber ball.
Infantry? You? She didn't respond.
Didn't explain or elaborate or try to justify her existence. Just picked up her mug and walked toward the door.
Hold up, Jenkins called after her. Infantry where? When?
She paused at the doorway, hand on the frame. For the first time since she'd appeared in our space, something shifted in her posture.
Not defensiveness. Something else.
Something that made the hair on my arms stand up without understanding why.
Kandahar Province. Paktika Province. Helmand.
She listed the names like items on a grocery list.
18 months total deployment time across 3 tours. Afghanistan.
The word nobody said hung in the air like cordite after a firefight.
Oh, Wilson said, his voice smaller now. I didn't. I mean.
But Chen was already gone, her footsteps echoing down the hallway with the measured cadence of someone who'd learned to move quietly through dangerous places. The room fell silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of cadets running formations outside. I found myself staring at the doorway where she'd stood, trying to reconcile the small woman with soft hands and regulation hair with the places she'd mentioned.
Kandahar. Paktika. Helmand. I deployed to Iraq twice during the surge. I knew what those names meant.
Knew what 18 months in those provinces did to people. Knew the difference between someone who'd been shot at and someone who'd done the shooting.
Jenkins cleared his throat. Well, shit. That seemed to sum it up. I spent the rest of the week thinking about Lieutenant Sarah Chen.
Not intentionally, she just kept floating back into my consciousness like smoke from a candle you thought you'd blown out.
During lectures, I'd catch myself wondering what she'd seen in those provinces.
During grading, I'd remember the way she'd listed those place names, matter of fact, like someone reading coordinates off a map. Thursday morning, I found myself walking past Building C on my way to nowhere in particular.
Room 305 was on the 2nd floor.
I could hear voices through the walls, the usual pre-class chatter of cadets who thought they knew everything about everything. 18 third and fourth years, Morrison had said. The kind of students who'd grown comfortable with their own competence, who'd mastered the basics and now assumed mastery extended to everything. I climbed the stairs. The hallway outside 305 buzzed with conversation. Through the open door, I could see cadets sprawled in their seats with the casual confidence of people who'd never been truly afraid. A few were comparing stories from summer training exercises. One was showing off photos from some weekend adventure involving motorcycles and beer.
Normal. Predictable. Safe.
Then, Chen walked past me, heading for the classroom. She moved differently than I remembered from the faculty lounge.
More deliberate. Like someone switching from standby mode to active duty.
Her footsteps had acquired an edge, still quiet, but with purpose behind them. The conversation in the classroom died.
Not gradually. Not the way talk usually fades when an instructor enters. All at once, like someone had flipped a switch.
I edged closer to the doorway, trying to look casual while being anything but.
From where I stood, I could see about half the room.
Cadets who'd been laughing 30 seconds earlier now sat straighter in their chairs, unconsciously adjusting posture without understanding why. Chen set her materials on the desk.
Looked up at the class. Said nothing.
The silence stretched.
Became uncomfortable. Became something else.
"Good morning," she said finally.
"Good morning, ma'am," came the automatic response, crisp, unified, regulation perfect.
But something had shifted in the room's atmosphere. Something I couldn't name but could feel in my chest like pressure before a thunderstorm. "Advanced combat tactics," she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the room despite being barely above conversational volume.
"How many of you have been in a fight?" A few hands went up. Tentative. Uncertain what kind of fight she meant. Not sparring.
Not training exercises. Not Friday night disagreements that ended with someone buying the other guy a beer. Her eyes moved across the room, cataloging faces.
A fight. Life or death. You or them. Winner lives. Loser doesn't. The hands dropped.
The silence that followed had weight to it.
Had gravity.
That's what I thought. She moved to the center of the room, positioning herself where every cadet could see her clearly.
Most of you will never be in that kind of fight.
You'll have long, successful careers managing logistics and training exercises and PowerPoint presentations. You'll retire with full benefits and boring stories.
I watched the cadets' faces.
Saw the mixture of relief and disappointment that comes with being told you'll probably never see real combat.
Some of you will. The relief evaporated.
And, when that moment comes, when theory becomes reality, when training becomes survival, you'll discover that everything you think you know about combat is wrong. She paused, letting the words settle.
Combat isn't about strength.
It's not about size or speed or who can do the most push-ups.
Combat is about making decisions when making decisions is impossible.
About functioning when your brain shuts down.
About staying human when everything around you has gone insane. I found myself holding my breath.
Today, we're going to talk about fear. Cadet Martinez, a heavyweight wrestler from Texas who'd never met a challenge he couldn't bulldoze through, raised his hand.
Ma'am, with respect, fear is just something you push through. Mind over matter.
Chen looked at him for a long moment.
Not dismissively. Not condescendingly. Like she was seeing something in him that he hadn't seen in himself yet. Stand up. Martinez stood, all 6'1", 220 pounds of him. Close your eyes.
He closed them, still smiling slightly.
Still confident.
You're in a building, Chen said, her voice dropping to just above a whisper.
3rd floor. Concrete walls. No windows. The only exit is the stairwell behind you. I watched Martinez's face. Saw the smile fade as he concentrated. You hear footsteps. Multiple sets. Coming up the stairs. Fast.
The classroom had gone completely silent. Even the usual background noise from the hallway seemed muted.
You have a rifle. 30 rounds. The footsteps are getting closer. You can hear voices now, speaking a language you don't understand. Angry voices. Martinez's jaw tightened. The footsteps stop. Right outside your door.
You hear metal on metal.
Someone's testing the handle. I realized I was holding my breath again. What do you do? Martinez opened his eyes, blinking as if returning from somewhere far away. I prepare to engage. Set up a defensive position. Wrong.
The word cut through the classroom like a blade.
You run. Martinez stared at her. Ma'am? You run.
You don't think about honor or courage or what your instructors taught you about standing your ground.
You run. Because in that situation, running is survival. Standing is death.
She moved closer to Martinez, close enough that she had to crane her neck to look up at him.
Fear isn't weakness, cadet. Fear is information. Fear is your brain telling you that the situation has moved beyond normal parameters. Fear is what keeps you alive when bravery gets you killed. The silence in the room had acquired a different quality. Heavier. More attentive.
I've seen brave men die, she continued, her voice still quiet but somehow filling every corner of the room.
Seen them die because they confused courage with stupidity.
Seen them die because they thought fear was something to overcome instead of something to listen to. She turned to address the entire class. The strongest warrior I ever served with was a medic named Peterson.
5'6", maybe 140 pounds soaking wet. Medic, not infantry. Never fired his weapon in anger his entire first deployment.
I found myself leaning closer to the doorway, drawn by something in her voice.
Peterson saved more lives than the rest of us combined. You know why? Because when the shooting started, when everyone else was focused on killing the enemy, Peterson was afraid.
Afraid his friends would die. Afraid he wouldn't be fast enough or good enough or smart enough to save them. She paused, looking at each cadet in turn. That fear made him faster.
Made him smarter. Made him better. Because fear, properly understood, isn't the enemy of effectiveness. Fear is effectiveness. Cadet Thompson, a quiet kid from Montana who rarely spoke in class, raised his hand. Ma'am, how do you? I mean, if fear is supposed to help, how do you use it instead of being paralyzed by it?
Chen smiled for the first time since I'd met her.
Not a big smile.
Just a slight upward curve at the corner of her mouth.
But something in it made me realize I'd been fundamentally wrong about this woman.
That, she said, is exactly the right question. She moved to the whiteboard, picked up a marker, wrote a single word in block letters: decision. Fear becomes paralysis when you fight it. When you tell yourself you shouldn't be afraid, when you waste energy trying to be brave instead of trying to be effective.
She turned back to the class.
Fear becomes a tool when you accept it and, then, use it to inform your decisions.
She drew a simple diagram, a circle with arrows pointing outward.
In combat, you have maybe 2 seconds to assess a situation and choose a response.
2 seconds.
Your conscious mind can't process all the variables in 2 seconds.
But your fear can.
Fear is pattern recognition running at maximum speed.
Fear is your subconscious telling your conscious mind, this is wrong. This is dangerous. This is not what you trained for.
I realized I'd been standing in the doorway for 10 minutes, completely absorbed in a lecture that wasn't meant for me.
So you listen to the fear. You don't fight it, you don't overcome it, you don't push through it.
You listen to what it's telling you about the situation, and, then, you make a decision based on that information.
Martinez raised his hand again. But, ma'am, what if the fear is wrong? What if you're afraid of something that isn't actually dangerous?
Then, you die, Chen said simply. But, you'll die having made a conscious choice based on the best information available. Better than dying because you were too proud to admit you were afraid. The classroom had gone completely still. Even the air seemed to be listening. Here's what they don't tell you in basic training, she continued, setting down the marker and facing the class directly.
Combat isn't about eliminating fear. Combat is about making fear your ally instead of your enemy. About using that adrenaline surge to think faster, move quicker, see more clearly.
She moved back to the center of the room. Every person in this classroom will face a moment, maybe not in combat, maybe in civilian life, when fear will be the only thing standing between them and catastrophe.
When that moment comes, I want you to remember that feeling afraid doesn't make you weak. It makes you human.
And humans, when we stop fighting our own survival instincts, are capable of extraordinary things.
The class ended 15 minutes later. I watched the cadets file out, their faces different than when they'd entered. More thoughtful.
More uncertain, but, in a good way, like people who'd suddenly realized there was more to learn than they'd thought.
Chen packed her materials in silence, the same economical movements I'd noticed in the faculty lounge.
When the last cadet had left, she looked up and saw me standing in the doorway. Captain Morrison, she said.
Not surprised. Just acknowledging my presence. Hell of a first class. She nodded. They're good kids. Smart kids.
They just need to understand that smart doesn't always mean right. I found myself studying her face again, looking for clues I'd missed before.
The small scar above her left eyebrow.
The way her eyes moved constantly, cataloging exits and sightlines even in a perfectly safe classroom. The unconscious way her right hand stayed loose at her side, ready.
Can I ask you something? Sure. That story about Peterson. The medic. Was it true?
She finished packing her bag, zipped it closed with the same precision she applied to everything else.
Peterson died in Paktika province, she said quietly. IED. He was running toward wounded when it went off. The words hit me like a punch to the chest. He saved 6 people that day before the explosion. 6. Because he was afraid he wouldn't be fast enough. She shouldered her bag, headed for the door. Fear kept him alive for 2 deployments, she said as she passed me. Courage got him killed. And then, she was gone, leaving me standing in an empty classroom, staring at the word decision still written on the whiteboard in block letters. That night, I called my wife. How was work, she asked, the way she'd asked every night for 12 years. Different, I said. Different how? I thought about Lieutenant Sarah Chen. About the way 18 cocky cadets had sat in stunned silence while she redefined everything they thought they knew about strength and weakness. About the scar above her eyebrow and the story about a medic named Peterson and the casual way she'd listed provinces where people died. I think, I said slowly, I may have been wrong about some things. What kind of things? I looked out the window at the manicured lawns and neat brick buildings of the academy, at the safe, predictable world where we played at being warriors without ever having to face the reality of war. Important things, I said. But even then, even after that first class, I had no idea how wrong I'd really been. That would come later. Friday morning arrived with the kind of crisp October air that makes you remember why people fight wars over territory. I was halfway through my usual pre-class ritual, lukewarm coffee and yesterday's paperwork, when Jenkins burst into the faculty lounge like a man announcing a lottery win. You have got to see this, he said, practically vibrating with excitement. I looked up from my stack of essays about tactical battlefield communications, each more mind-numbing than the last. See what? Chun. She's in the combat training facility. Wilson glanced up from his newspaper. And? She's demolishing Patterson. That got my attention. Patterson was the instructor Chen had replaced, 6'2", former Green Beret, the kind of man who ate nails for breakfast and used the splinters as toothpicks. He'd agreed to stick around for a few weeks to help with the transition, mostly because nobody trusted a woman who looked like she should be teaching kindergarten to handle advanced combat tactics. Demolishing him how? I asked. Jenkins grinned like a kid who'd discovered his parents' Christmas hiding spot. Come see for yourself. 5 minutes later, I was following Jenkins and Wilson down to the basement training facility, a windowless concrete bunker that smelled like sweat, rubber mats, and decades of accumulated testosterone. The place had the institutional charm of a prison gymnasium, all exposed pipes and fluorescent lights that made everyone look slightly deceased. A crowd had gathered around the main training mat. Not just faculty cadets too, drawn by the kind of magnetic force that surrounds any situation where reputations might be shattered. They stood in a loose circle, talking in the hushed tones usually reserved for accidents and executions. In the center of the circle, Patterson circled Chen like a shark considering dinner. He looked confident. Why wouldn't he? 6 inches taller, 60 pounds heavier, 15 years of experience breaking people for a living. This wasn't going to be a fight, it was going to be an education about the natural order of things. Chen stood in the center of the mat, perfectly still. Not tense. Not coiled. Just waiting. Whenever you're ready, ma'am, Patterson said, the ma'am carrying just enough emphasis to make it sound like pity disguised as respect. I found myself holding my breath. Patterson moved first, a quick step forward, hands reaching for a standard grappling position. Fast. Professional. Textbook. Chen wasn't there anymore. I'm not sure how else to describe it. One moment she was directly in front of him, the next she was behind his left shoulder. Not dramatically, not with any flashy movement that screamed "look at me." She'd simply shifted. Like water flowing around a stone. Patterson spun to follow her motion. She wasn't there either. This time she was behind his right elbow, close enough to touch him but not touching, close enough to strike but not striking. Just present. Like a shadow that had decided to become autonomous. What the hell? Wilson whispered. Patterson reset, backing up to create space. Smart move. When you lose track of your opponent, you create distance and reassess. Basic tactics. Chen let him back away. Didn't press her advantage. Just stood there, hands loose at her sides, watching him with the kind of patient attention you see in hunters. Or predators. Patterson tried again. This time he was ready for her movement, ready to adjust. He feinted left, committed right, reached for her center of gravity. He grabbed air. Chen had moved maybe 6 inches. 6 inches. But, somehow those 6 inches had made her untouchable. She was still right there, close enough to breathe on, but, when Patterson's hands closed they found nothing but empty space and embarrassment. The crowd had gone quiet. Not regular quiet, the kind of quiet that happens when people witness something that doesn't fit their understanding of how the world works. "Ma'am," Patterson said, and, for the first time there was real respect in the word. "How the hell are you doing that?" Chen smiled. The same small smile I'd seen in the classroom, like sunlight breaking through clouds. "Physics." "Physics? You're grabbing for where I am. I'm moving to where you're not." She reset to the center of the mat. "Again." Patterson nodded, wiped sweat from his hands. "Third time lucky, right?" "Wrong." This time Chen didn't just evade, she engaged. As Patterson reached for her, she stepped into his space instead of away from it. For a fraction of a second, they were close enough to dance. Then, Patterson was sitting on the mat, looking confused about how he'd gotten there. No dramatic throw. No visible technique. One moment he was standing, the next he wasn't. "Jesus," someone whispered. Chen extended a hand to help him up. Patterson took it, still looking puzzled. "Again?" "Sure." What followed wasn't a fight. It wasn't even training. It was a demonstration of the difference between knowing about violence and understanding it. Patterson was good, damned good. Professional. Efficient. Everything you'd want in a combat instructor. Chen was something else entirely. She moved like someone who'd internalized physics at a molecular level. Every shift in weight, every adjustment of angle, every micro-movement was calculated not for show but for effect. When Patterson grabbed for her arm, she was already using his momentum against him. When he tried to sweep her legs, she was already stepping through the sweep into a position that left him off balance and vulnerable. And, through it all, she never looked like she was fighting. She looked like she was solving math problems in real time. After the 5th time Patterson found himself on the mat, he stayed down. Not from injury, from bewilderment. "I don't understand," he said. "I can't grab you. I can't hit you. I can't even figure out where you're going to be." Chen crouched down beside him, her voice dropping to conversational volume but, somehow still carrying to every corner of the room. "That's because you're fighting me like I'm a man." Patterson frowned. "Ma'am? Everything you know about combat is based on fighting people who fight like you. Same basic size, same basic strength, same basic approach to problem solving." She gestured at the space between them. "But, I'm not you. I'm smaller, weaker, slower in a straight line. If I fight like you fight, I lose every time." She stood, backed away to give him room to get up. "So I don't fight like you fight. I fight like me." The crowd was leaning in now, drawn by something in her voice that promised secrets worth knowing. "Every combat system in the world is designed by men for men," she continued. "Based on the assumption that bigger and stronger wins. And, in most situations, that assumption is correct. But, not all situations." Patterson got to his feet, brushing dust off his training gear. "So what's different?" "Physics," she said again. "Leverage. Momentum. Understanding that in combat, you're not trying to overpower your opponent, you're trying to redirect their power back at them." She moved to the center of the mat, gestured for him to join her. "Attack me. For real this time. Don't hold back." Patterson hesitated. "Ma'am, I don't want to hurt you." The smile that crossed Chen's face was different this time. Sharper. Like a blade catching light. You won't. What happened next stays with me. Will probably stay with me until I die. Not because it was violent, it wasn't. Because it was art. Patterson attacked. Really attacked. No holding back, no playing it safe. He came at her like a man trying to end a fight quickly and decisively. Chen received his attack like water receives a stone. She absorbed his momentum, redirected it, used it. His fist passed through the space where she'd been and kept going, carrying him off balance. His attempt to grab her became the reason he couldn't maintain his footing. His strength became the source of his vulnerability. In 3 seconds, maybe 4, Patterson was on the mat again. But this time he wasn't just down, he was locked in a hold that looked almost gentle until you realized he couldn't move. Couldn't breathe properly. Couldn't do anything except acknowledge that he'd been completely, utterly, professionally neutralized. Chen held the position for exactly 1 second. Long enough to prove the point. Then, she released him and stepped back. The difference, she said, helping him to his feet for the 6th time, isn't strength. It's understanding. Patterson nodded slowly. Understanding what? That combat isn't about imposing your will on your opponent. It's about becoming the person your opponent can't fight. The room had gone completely silent. Even the usual background noise from the upper floors seemed muted. In Afghanistan, Chen continued, her voice still conversational but somehow filling the space, I was part of a joint task force. Special operations. We worked with local forces, mostly Afghan National Army. I found myself leaning forward, drawn by something in her tone. There was an ANA captain named Farshid. Good soldier. Brave. But small, even by Afghan standards. Maybe 5'4", 130 pounds. The other soldiers called him Kuchak, little one. She moved away from Patterson, addressing the room now instead of just him. We were clearing a compound in Helmand. Standard operation. Room by room, methodical, by the book. I was paired with Farshid for the 3rd floor. The silence in the room had weight. Had gravity. We entered a room of storage, we thought, and found 3 Taliban fighters hiding behind stacked grain sacks. Armed. Ready. I could see the memory playing behind her eyes. The lead fighter was huge. Maybe 6'2", 220. He had a rifle, but he was too close to use it effectively. So he dropped it and came at Farshid with a knife. Chen paused, scanning the faces around her. Farshid never tried to overpower him. Never tried to outmuscle him. He just moved. Let the big guy's momentum carry him past. Used the fighter's own strength to put him on the ground. Clean. Professional. Over in maybe 5 seconds. She looked directly at Patterson. Afterward, I asked Farshid where he'd learned to fight like that. You know what he said? Patterson shook his head. I learned to fight like someone who dies if he loses. The words hung in the air like smoke. That's the difference, Chen said quietly. Most of you have learned to fight like people who can afford to lose. Farshid learned to fight like someone who couldn't. Cadet Morrison, not related to the colonel, just unfortunate naming, raised his hand. Ma'am, are you saying we're not training hard enough? I'm saying you're training for the wrong thing. She moved to address the cadets directly. You're training to win fights. I'm teaching you to survive them. What's the difference? Asked Cadet Williams, a wrestler from Ohio who'd never met a challenge he couldn't muscle through. Winning implies your opponent gets a choice in the outcome, Chen said. Survival means they don't. She gestured for Williams to join her on the mat. He stood slowly, uncertain whether he was being invited to dance or executed. Standard defensive position, she told him. Hands up, weight balanced, ready to engage. Williams complied, settling into a textbook fighting stance that would have made his high school wrestling coach proud. Good, Chen said. Now attack me. Williams hesitated. Ma'am? Attack me. However you want. Whatever feels natural.
Williams moved, not full speed, but committed enough to make his intention clear. A straightforward takedown attempt, the kind of move that had probably worked for him since middle school.
Chen stepped into his motion instead of away from it.
For a fraction of a second, they were chest to chest, close enough that I could see her lips moving as she spoke directly into his ear. Then, Williams was on his back, staring at the ceiling with the kind of expression you see on people who've just discovered their fundamental understanding of reality was incomplete.
What did you just say to him? Jenkins called out.
Chen helped Williams to his feet.
I said this is what dying feels like.
Williams blinked, still processing what had happened.
Ma'am?
In real combat, the person who hesitates is the person who dies.
You hesitated because you're thinking about winning. About technique. About what your opponent might do.
She backed away, giving him space.
I'm thinking about survival. About ending the threat as quickly and efficiently as possible.
She turned to address the room again.
Every one of you has spent years learning to fight fair. Learning rules. Learning to respect your opponent. Those are good things. Important things. But they're also things that will get you killed. The crowd was hanging on every word now. Because your enemies won't fight fair. Won't follow rules. Won't respect you or your training or your good intentions.
They'll use whatever advantage they have, weapons, numbers, surprise, desperation, to put you in the ground. She paused, letting the words sink in. So when I teach combat, I don't teach you to be better fighters.
I teach you to be better survivors. To use every advantage you have, the speed, intelligence, training, desperation, whatever, to make sure you're the one who goes home. Patterson stepped forward. Ma'am, with respect, how do we train for that? How do we practice survival without dying? Shan smiled again.
That small, dangerous smile that I was beginning to realize meant someone was about to learn something they weren't expecting.
Scenario training, she said. Real scenarios.
Based on real situations where real people died because they fought fair instead of fighting smart. She moved to the center of the mat, positioning herself where everyone could see her clearly.
Williams, back on the mat. But, this time, I'm going to tell you a story while we work.
Williams rejoined her, still looking slightly stunned. Kandahar Province, 2019, Shin began, her voice dropping to just above a whisper but somehow still carrying to every corner of the room.
My unit was tasked with securing a compound that intelligence said was being used as a weapons cache.
She circled Williams slowly, the way a shark circles bait.
We went in at dawn. Standard breach and clear. I was point for my team, second floor, northeast corner.
Williams turned to keep her in sight, his body language shifting from confident to wary. I entered a bedroom, looked like, and found a woman sitting on the bed.
Maybe 60 years old. Grandmother.
Hands visible, no obvious weapons. The room had gone completely still. Protocol said to secure her, check for weapons, move on.
But something felt wrong. The way she was sitting. Too still. Too calm.
Like she was waiting for something.
Chen stopped circling, positioned herself directly in front of Williams. What would you do? Williams frowned.
Secure her according to protocol.
Check for weapons. Move on. Good answer. Textbook answer. Shen's voice had acquired an edge. Wrong answer.
She moved faster than thought. One moment she was standing 3 feet away from Williams. The next she was behind him, her arm across his throat in a hold that looked gentle until you realized he couldn't breathe. The grandmother had a grenade, she said quietly, her voice barely audible but somehow filling the entire room.
Pin already pulled.
She was holding the handle down, waiting for an American soldier to get close enough.
Williams's eyes widened. If I'd followed protocol, we'd both be dead. If I'd treated her like a non-combatant, we'd both be dead. If I'd hesitated for even 2 seconds, we'd both be dead. She released Williams, who staggered forward gasping. So what did you do? Patterson asked. Chen's expression went completely neutral. Professional. I shot her. The words landed like a physical blow. Didn't think about it. Didn't consider alternatives. Didn't hesitate. Saw the threat, processed the situation, acted. She looked around the room, meeting each pair of eyes in turn. She was dead before her finger came off the handle. The silence that followed was different from any silence I'd experienced before. Heavier. More final. Combat isn't about being fair, Jen continued, her voice still quiet but carrying to every corner of the room. It's not about giving your opponent a chance. It's about identifying threats and neutralizing them as quickly and efficiently as possible, regardless of who they are or what they look like. Cadet Thompson, the quiet kid from Montana, raised his hand tentatively. Ma'am, how do you? I mean, afterward, how do you deal with? He couldn't finish the question. Chen looked at him for a long moment. You don't, she said simply. You carry it. Forever. Because the alternative, hesitating, dying, letting your friends die, is worse. The room stayed quiet for maybe 30 seconds. People processing. People realizing that everything they thought they knew about combat was incomplete. Finally, Jenkins broke the silence. Ma'am, is that why you left active duty? Chen shook her head. I left active duty because I was good at it. Too good. And, after 18 months of being too good at killing people, I decided I'd rather teach people how not to die. She moved toward the edge of the mat, signaling the end of the demonstration. Same skills. Different application. That night, I couldn't sleep. Kept thinking about Lieutenant Sarah Chan and the casual way she'd described shooting a 60-year-old woman. About the mathematics of survival and the weight of decisions made in fractions of seconds. I called my wife again. How was work today? She asked. Complicated, I said. Complicated how? I stared out the window at our safe, suburban street. At the manicured lawns and porch lights and the absolute certainty that no one hiding behind our garbage cans was planning to kill us. I think, I said slowly, I'm starting to understand the difference between playing war and fighting one. Is that good or bad? I'm not sure, I admitted. Ask me again in a few weeks. But, even then, even after watching her demolish Patterson like he was made of paper, even after hearing about grandmothers with grenades and the mathematics of survival, I still didn't understand what Lieutenant Sarah Chan really was. That revelation was still coming. 3 weeks after the demonstration that left Patterson questioning his life choices, I found myself in the administrative building at 0630 hours, clutching a cup of coffee that could have stripped paint and staring at a computer screen that contained information I wasn't supposed to see. I wasn't snooping. Not exactly. Colonel Morrison had asked me to update the faculty database with Chen's training certifications and qualifications. Standard administrative bullshit that normally wouldn't merit a second thought. Type in the relevant information, hit save, move on with life. Except Chen's file was classified. Not classified, I had the necessary clearance for basic personnel records. But, her service record was tagged with more acronyms than a government soup factory. Some I recognized: OIF, Operation Iraqi Freedom; OEF, Operation Enduring Freedom. Others I didn't: TF Knight, Jade Hammer, something called Operation Ghostwalk that made my security clearance software ask if I was sure I wanted to proceed. I clicked yes. The screen populated with information that made me set down my coffee before I spilled it all over the keyboard. Chen, Sarah M., Lieutenant, U.S. Army MOS, 11B, Infantry/18E, Special Forces Communications, Unit, 1st Special Forces Group, Airborne, Special Forces. Green Berets. The woman we'd been calling Pixie behind her back was a fucking Green Beret. I scrolled down, my brain trying to process information that didn't fit with anything I thought I knew about Sarah Chen.
Deployments: Afghanistan, Kandahar Province, 8 months, Afghanistan, Paktika Province, 6 months, Afghanistan, Helmand Province, 4 months, awards and decorations: Bronze Star Medal, 2, Purple Heart, 1, Combat Infantryman Badge, Special Forces Tab, Ranger Tab, Jumpmaster Badge. The list went on. Page after page of commendations, certifications, and acronyms that painted a picture of someone who'd spent 3 years doing things that required classifications I didn't have. But it was the final entry that made me push back from the computer like I'd been slapped. Operation Ghostwalk, classified role, team leader, duration, 6 months, status, mission successful, casualties, classified commendation, Distinguished Service Cross, pending, Distinguished Service Cross. Second only to the Medal of Honor. Given for extraordinary heroism in combat against an armed enemy. Pending. I stared at the screen for maybe 10 minutes, my coffee growing cold as I tried to reconcile the quiet woman who taught fear as information with the soldier described in these files. The woman who helped Patterson to his feet after demonstrating the physics of violence was the same person who'd led classified missions in some of the most dangerous places on Earth. And we'd been treating her like a substitute teacher. I printed the file. Not because I needed it, but because some part of my brain refused to believe what I was reading. Paper made it real in a way pixels couldn't. Then, I made a mistake that would haunt me for months. I showed it to Jenkins. "Holy shit," he said, reading over my shoulder. "Holy actual shit. Yeah. Green Berets. She's fucking Special Forces." He pointed at the screen. "Look at this, Bronze Star. Purple Heart. What's this one? Jumpmaster Badge? It means she's qualified to run airborne operations. Jumping out of planes. In combat." Jenkins went quiet for a moment, processing. "Jesus. We've been such assholes." "Yeah. And this thing, Operation Ghostwalk. What do you think that was?" I scrolled back up to the classification tags. "Something we're not cleared to know about. But it says team leader. She was in charge. And, look, Distinguished Service Cross. Pending. That's serious shit, right?" I nodded. Serious shit. We sat in silence for a few minutes, absorbing the implications. The woman we'd dismissed was more qualified than anyone in our department. More qualified than Patterson. More qualified than the department head. Possibly more qualified than everyone combined. "We have to tell Wilson," Jenkins said finally. "Do we? Come on. He's been calling her Little Chen for 3 weeks. He needs to know." I should have said no. Should have closed the file, deleted the printout, pretended I'd never seen it. Should have understood that some information is dangerous not because it's secret, but because it changes everything you thought you knew about the world. Instead, I said, "Yeah. He needs to know." Wilson's reaction was predictable. First disbelief, then embarrassment, then a kind of defensive anger that people get when they realize they've been fundamentally wrong about something important. "How are we supposed to know?" he demanded, pacing around his office like a caged animal. She never said anything. Never mentioned it. Just stood there taking our shit like a professional soldier dealing with assholes who should have known better? Jenkins suggested. Wilson stopped pacing. "Don't give me that holier-than-thou bullshit. You were making jokes too." That was true. We all had been. "The point is," I said, trying to steer the conversation back toward productive, "now we know. And maybe we should adjust our approach accordingly." "Adjust how? Treat her with the respect she's earned?" Wilson snorted. "Respect. Right. You know what I respect? Results. Combat effectiveness. Proof that all this fancy paperwork translates to actual capability." She demolished Patterson, Jenkins pointed out. Patterson's been behind a desk for 2 years. I'm talking about real proof. Real demonstration of what makes her so special. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. "What are you suggesting?" "Live exercise.
Full-scale training scenario. Let her show us what all those medals really mean. Wilson. What? She's the expert, right? The decorated war hero? Time to see if she can walk the walk. The cold feeling got worse. That's not necessary. We've seen what she can do. Have we? We've seen her handle one guy in a controlled environment. I'm talking about something real. Something that tests whether all this special forces bullshit actually matters in a practical situation. Jenkins and I exchanged glances. This was moving in a direction that felt dangerous. What kind of exercise? Jenkins asked carefully. Wilson smiled. Not a friendly smile. The kind of smile predators get when they corner prey. Hostage rescue scenario. Multiple opponents. Live ammunition, blanks, obviously, but full scenario protocols. Chen against our best tactical response team. That's insane, I said. She's one person against a full team. If she's as good as her file says she is, that shouldn't matter. Wilson, this is a bad idea. Why? Afraid she'll fail? No, I realized. I was afraid she wouldn't. Word spread through the academy like wildfire through dry grass. By Thursday afternoon, it seemed like half the faculty and a significant portion of the cadet population knew about the evaluation exercise scheduled for Friday morning. Chen, predictably, said nothing when Morrison informed her of the scenario. Just nodded once and asked about the parameters. Building 12, Morrison explained. Third floor. Hostage situation, 5 civilians, 4 hostiles. Your objective is to neutralize the threat and secure the hostages with minimal casualties. Opposition force? 4-man team from our tactical response unit. Patterson, Williams, Rodriguez, and Turner. I winced. Patterson we'd already seen in action. Williams was former Marine infantry. Rodriguez had served 2 tours in Iraq. Turner was ex-Navy SEAL. Together, they represented more combat experience than most small countries could field. Rules of engagement? Chen asked. Standard protocols. Blanks only, but treated as live fire. Scenario ends when either all hostiles are neutralized or the exercise controller calls halt. Chen nodded again. Time limit? None. Take as long as you need. Equipment? Standard issue. Sidearm, tactical gear. Whatever you feel you need. For the first time since I'd known her, Chen smiled that dangerous smile. I'll need night vision goggles. Morrison frowned. It's a daylight exercise. Not for long. Friday morning arrived gray and overcast, the kind of weather that makes you want to stay in bed and pretend the world doesn't exist. I arrived at Building 12 at 0800 to find a crowd already gathering, faculty, cadets, even some administrative staff who'd heard rumors about what was about to unfold. The building was a standard 3-story concrete block used for urban warfare training. Narrow corridors, multiple rooms, perfect sight lines for defenders and deadly angles for attackers. The kind of place where one person with good positioning could hold off a squad. Or where a squad with good tactics could corner one person with nowhere to run. Morrison set up a command station in the parking lot, complete with radio communications and video feeds from cameras positioned throughout the building. Multiple screens showed different angles of the 3rd floor, where 5 academy staff members playing hostages sat tied to chairs in what had once been a conference room. The opposition force, Patterson's team, had been in position since 0730. For experienced soldiers with tactical gear and enough simulated firepower to level a small building. Chen arrived at exactly 0800. She'd traded her usual neat civilian clothes for military utilities, complete with body armor and equipment harness. Night vision goggles hung around her neck. She moved differently in tactical gear, more deliberately, like someone switching from practice mode to operational status. You ready for this? Morrison asked her. She checked her weapon, a standard issue sidearm loaded with blanks. Yes, sir. Any questions about the scenario? Just one.
She looked up at the building, scanning windows and entry points with the kind of systematic attention you see in people who've learned that overlooking details gets you killed.
What's the backup plan when Patterson's team fails?
The confidence in her voice sent shivers down my spine.
Morrison blinked. Excuse me? The backup plan.
For when they fail to prevent the hostage rescue. She finished her equipment check, straightened her gear.
Because they're going to fail. It wasn't boasting. Wasn't bravado.
Just a statement of fact delivered with the same tone someone might use to discuss tomorrow's weather forecast. Lieutenant, Morrison said carefully, you're going up against 4 highly trained operators in a controlled environment that favors defenders. Are you sure you want to, sir? Chen interrupted gently, with respect, those aren't operators.
Those are instructors. There's a difference.
She turned toward the building.
The exercise begins when I enter the building? Yes. And ends when all hostiles are neutralized or you call halt? Correct. Chen nodded once.
Then, you might want to tell Patterson's team they have about 10 minutes to enjoy their tactical advantage.
She walked toward the building, her stride smooth and economical.
At the entrance, she paused, put on the night vision goggles, and disappeared into the stairwell.
For 5 minutes, nothing happened.
The radio chatter from Patterson's team was confident, professional, routine.
They'd established overlapping fields of fire, secured all entry points, set up crossfire positions that would turn any attacker into hamburger.
Textbook defensive tactics executed by people who knew their business.
Then, the lights went out. The building went completely dark. Not dim, not shadowy. Dark.
Like someone had cut the main power feed and plunged 3 floors of concrete and steel into absolute blackness.
What the hell?
Wilson muttered, staring at the now useless video screens. Morrison keyed his radio.
Team leader, report.
Patterson's voice crackled through the speakers, calm but with an edge of concern.
Lost all power, sir. Switching to night vision. Copy. Continue the exercise. For another few minutes, radio traffic remained routine. The team adapted to the darkness, adjusted positions, maintained their perimeter. Professional. Competent. Ready for whatever came next. They weren't ready for Chen.
The first sign of trouble was Rodriguez's voice, tense and confused.
Movement in the west corridor. I'm investigating. 30 seconds later, Rodriguez, report. Patterson's voice. Silence. Rodriguez, do you copy? More silence.
Turner, move to Rodriguez's position. Williams, maintain overwatch on the hostages. Turner's acknowledgement crackled through the radio. Then, 3 minutes later, his voice again, I can't find Rodriguez.
His position is empty. A pause.
Then, Patterson, his voice tighter now, define empty.
Gone, sir. No sign of struggle. Equipment's here, but he's not.
The crowd around Morrison's command station had gone completely quiet. On the radio, we could hear the team adapting to the unexpected development.
Tightening their perimeter. Increasing alertness. Doing everything right according to their training. Williams, Patterson called. Status on the hostages? Secure, sir. No movement in the conference room. Copy.
Turner, fall back to the conference room. We're going to. The transmission cut off mid-sentence. Morrison keyed his radio.
Team leader, please repeat. Silence. All stations, report status. More silence.
The crowd shifted nervously.
This wasn't how training exercises were supposed to go.
Training exercises had radio chatter and coordinated movements and predictable outcomes.
They didn't have people disappearing into darkness like prey animals picked off by an invisible predator. Williams, Morrison called. Report.
Williams's voice came through the speakers, strained and uncertain. Sir, I've lost contact with the team leader and Turner.
I'm maintaining position with the hostages, but. But, what?
Sir, something's not right.
This doesn't feel like an exercise anymore. A chill ran down my spine. Williams was ex-Marine infantry.
2 tours in Iraq.
Not the kind of person who spooked easily.
Williams, maintain your position.
Do not abandon the hostages. Copy, sir. But, I'm telling you, this feels wrong. Like we're being hunted.
The word hunted hung in the air like smoke from a fire you can't see. For 10 more minutes, Williams maintained radio contact. His voice grew increasingly tense as he reported shadows in the corridors, sounds that didn't belong, the growing sense that something was moving through the building with inhuman patience and precision. Then, his radio went silent too. Morrison stared at his communications equipment like it had personally betrayed him. Around the command station, faculty and cadets exchanged nervous glances. This had stopped being an exercise and become something else. Something that felt less like training and more like watching a horror movie where the monster always stayed just outside the frame.
Sir, one of the communications technicians said quietly, should we call halt? Morrison considered this. The exercise parameters were clear, it ended when all hostiles were neutralized or he called halt. But, how do you call halt on something that's already beyond your control? Not yet, he said finally. Let's see how this plays out. 20 more minutes passed in complete silence.
The building sat dark and quiet, giving no indication of what was happening inside.
No radio chatter. No sounds of struggle. Nothing.
Then, Chen's voice crackled through the speakers, calm and professional as if she was reporting the weather.
Command, this is Chen.
For hostiles neutralized.
Hostages secure and ready for extraction. The silence that followed felt like a physical weight.
Morrison keyed his radio, his voice barely steady.
Chen, confirm all 4 hostiles neutralized? Confirmed, sir. Patterson, Williams, Rodriguez, and Turner are all down.
No injuries, but they're out of the exercise.
Hostages are unharmed and ready to move.
What's your location?
Conference room, 3rd floor.
I'll meet the extraction team at the main entrance. Morrison looked around at the crowd of stunned faces surrounding his command station.
Chen, how did you, sir? Her voice interrupted, still maddeningly calm, permission to debrief after extraction. The hostages have been through enough. Granted. Extraction team, move in.
20 minutes later, Patterson and his team sat in the parking lot looking like people who just survived a natural disaster. They were physically unharmed. The neutralization had involved Chen appearing out of darkness, disabling their night vision equipment, and placing training knives against vital points before they even realized she was there.
But, psychologically?
They looked broken. I never saw her coming, Patterson said for the 3rd time, staring at his hands like they belonged to someone else.
Never heard her. Never sensed her.
She was just there.
Rodriguez nodded shakily. 1 second I was moving down the corridor, next second something hit me from behind. Didn't hear footsteps. Didn't hear breathing. Nothing. Williams was even worse.
As the last man standing, he'd spent 30 minutes alone in the dark, knowing his teammates had been systematically eliminated by something he couldn't see or hear or understand.
She's not human, he said quietly.
I know how that sounds, but humans make noise.
Humans have heat signatures. Humans exist in ways you can detect. She was like fighting a ghost.
Turner, the ex-SEAL, said nothing. Just sat there staring at the building like it had personally offended him. Chen, meanwhile, stood off to one side looking completely normal.
Not even breathing hard.
Her gear was clean, her weapons secure, her demeanor as calm as if she'd just finished a routine training exercise instead of systematically dismantling 4 experienced operators in complete darkness.
How? Jenkins asked her. How the hell did you do that?
Chen looked at him with that small, patient smile. Physics, she said.
That's not an answer.
sure it is. She gestured toward the building. Sound travels at 343 meters per second through air at room temperature. Light travels at 300 million meters per second. If you eliminate light, sound becomes the primary sensory input. She paused, letting the implications sink in. But humans are terrible at processing audio information in three-dimensional space. We evolved as visual predators. Take away sight, and most people become functionally deaf. They hear sounds, but they can't accurately locate their source or interpret their meaning. Wilson shook his head. That still doesn't explain. I spent 6 months in Helmand province tracking Taliban fighters through cave systems, Chen continued. Underground. No light. No GPS. No technological advantage. Just sound, smell, and spatial awareness. She looked directly at Patterson's team. You were defending against an enemy you could see. I was hunting prey I'd already studied. The word prey sent another chill through the crowd. But the radio communications, Morrison said. You eliminated 4 men without making a sound loud enough for any of them to hear. Because I wasn't fighting them, Chen replied. I was managing them. Managing them? Think about it from a systems perspective. You have 4 operators in a confined space with established communications protocols and predetermined responses to threats. If you understand the system, you can manipulate it. She pulled out a small handheld device, some kind of electronic equipment I didn't recognize. Radio jammers, strategically placed. Cut Patterson off from his team at the exact moment Turner was moving to investigate Rodriguez's position. Williams maintained contact because I wanted him to. Wanted him to report what he was experiencing. Wanted the rest of them to hear the fear in his voice. Jesus Christ, Patterson whispered. Fear is a force multiplier, Chen continued. Not just for the person experiencing it, but for everyone who witnesses it. By the time I reached Williams, his teammates were already psychologically defeated. They knew they were being hunted by something they couldn't understand or counter. She looked around at the stunned faces surrounding her. That's not combat. That's warfare. The parking lot went completely silent except for the distant sound of cadets running formations and the normal business of an academy going about its daily routine. Finally, Morrison cleared his throat. Lieutenant Chen, that was impressive. But, I have to ask, was all this really necessary? The psychological manipulation, the systematic elimination, the theater? Chen's expression didn't change. Sir, you asked me to demonstrate my capabilities. This is what my capabilities look like in practice. But surely you could have achieved the same objective without what, sir? Without showing them what it feels like to be prey? Her voice remained calm, professional, but something had shifted in her tone. Without demonstrating the difference between training for combat and preparing for war? She gestured toward Patterson's team. These are good soldiers. Well-trained, experienced, competent. In a fair fight, any one of them could probably hold their own. But war isn't fair. War is about creating unfair advantages and exploiting them until your enemy breaks. Morrison nodded slowly. I understand that, Lieutenant. But this is an academy, not a battlefield. Yes, sir. Which is why they're sitting here feeling embarrassed instead of lying in body bags. The bluntness of her words hit the crowd like a physical blow. The Taliban fighters I tracked in those cave systems? Chen continued. They didn't get to learn from their mistakes. They didn't get to go home afterward and think about what went wrong. They just died. She looked directly at Patterson. You're alive because this was training. Because I chose non-lethal methods. Because the objective was education, not elimination. Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. But, if this had been real, if those hostages had been real, if the stakes had been real, you'd be dead. All of you. And, you'd be dead because you were thinking about fighting instead of thinking about surviving. Patterson nodded slowly, something like understanding dawning in his eyes.
The point of today wasn't to humiliate you, Chen said. It was to show you what happens when theoretical knowledge meets practical application. When classroom tactics encounter battlefield reality. She began collecting her gear, movements precise and economical. Most of you will never face a situation like this for real. You'll have long, successful careers teaching theory to cadets who will teach theory to other cadets. That's good. That's important. The world needs people who understand the principles of warfare even if they never practice them. She shouldered her equipment bag. But some of you will. And, when that happens, I want you to remember today. Remember what it felt like to be hunted by something you couldn't see or hear or understand. Remember that feeling, and use it to keep your students alive. She headed toward her vehicle, then paused and looked back at the crowd. And maybe next time someone tells you they have 18 months of combat experience in Afghanistan, you might consider the possibility that they know what they're talking about. She got in her car and drove away, leaving 43 faculty members and cadets standing in a parking lot, staring at a building that had just taught them more about warfare than 4 years of college could provide. That night, I didn't call my wife. I sat in my office, staring out the window at the safe, predictable world of the academy, trying to understand what I'd witnessed. Trying to reconcile the quiet woman who helped Patterson to his feet with the predator who'd systematically dismantled 4 experienced operators in complete darkness. Trying to figure out how someone so small could cast such a large shadow. And wondering, for the first time in my 12-year career, whether we were really preparing our students for the world they might have to face. Or just giving them the illusion that preparation was possible. Part 4. The truth. The knock on my office door came at 2,147 hours on a Tuesday night in November, 3 weeks after the exercise that had left Patterson's team questioning their understanding of reality. I was grading papers, trying to make sense of an essay about tactical communications that read like it had been written by someone who'd learned English from a manual. "Come in," I called, expecting a cadet with some urgent crisis that absolutely couldn't wait until morning. Lieutenant Sarah Chen stepped through the doorway. She was out of uniform, jeans, sweater, civilian clothes that made her look even smaller than usual. But there was something different about her posture, something that suggested that casual appearance was deliberate camouflage rather than relaxation. "Ma'am," I said, starting to stand. "Sit," she said quietly. "Please. This isn't official." She closed the door behind her, turned the deadbolt with the kind of precise movement that suggested she checked whether my office had one before deciding to visit. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Of course." She moved to the window, peered through the blinds at the empty campus beyond. "How long have you been teaching here?" 12 years. "Good job? Secure? Pension and benefits?" I frowned. "Yes." "Why?" She turned from the window, studied my face with the kind of attention you see in people making critical assessments. "Because what I'm about to tell you could end your career if you repeat it. And I need to know if you're the kind of person who can live with dangerous knowledge." Something cold settled in my stomach. What kind of dangerous knowledge? The kind that explains why a Special Forces operator with 3 combat deployments and a pending Distinguished Service Cross is teaching freshman tactics at a military academy instead of leading teams in active theaters. She moved to the chair across from my desk, sat down with the controlled grace that I'd learned meant she was operating at full awareness. The kind that explains why my service record is classified and why certain people very much want me to stay quiet about what really happened in Afghanistan. I set down my pen, pushed the stack of essays aside. "Chen, if this is classified information, it's not classified," she interrupted. "It's worse. It's true." The distinction hit me like a physical blow. What's the difference? Classified information is dangerous because it reveals operational details. True information is dangerous because it reveals operational failures. She leaned back in the chair, but her posture remained alert. Guess which one powerful people care more about protecting? I thought about the night 3 weeks ago when I'd watched 4 experienced soldiers get systematically dismantled by someone who moved through darkness like she'd been born in it. About the casual way she'd described shooting a grandmother with a grenade.
About the word pray and the way it had made everyone in that parking lot feel like potential victims.
What really happened in Afghanistan? I asked.
Chen was quiet for so long I thought she'd decided not to answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper.
Have you ever heard of Operation Ghostwalk?
Only what was in your service record.
Classified mission. Team leader. Distinguished Service Cross pending. She nodded. Helmand Province. 6 months.
Joint operation with British SAS and local Afghan forces. Objective was to eliminate a high-value target network that had been disrupting coalition supply lines.
Sounds straightforward. It should have been.
She stood, moved back to the window, checked the blinds again.
Intelligence said we were dealing with a standard Taliban cell.
Maybe 20 fighters, basic weapons, operating out of a compound near the Pakistani border.
But it wasn't standard. No. It wasn't.
She turned from the window, her expression completely neutral.
It was a trap.
The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire you couldn't see.
What kind of trap? The kind that happens when someone in your chain of command is feeding information to the enemy.
When your mission parameters are designed to put you in the wrong place at the wrong time with insufficient support. I felt that cold feeling spread from my stomach to my chest.
Someone set you up? Not me specifically. My team.
12 of the best operators the US military had to offer, walking into a kill zone because someone with eagles on their collar needed to make a problem disappear. She sat back down, her movements still controlled but with something underneath them now. Something that looked like barely contained anger.
The compound we hit was empty. Had been empty for weeks.
But the surrounding hills weren't empty. They were full of fighters with advanced weapons and detailed intelligence about our approach routes, our communications frequencies, our standard operating procedures.
How many? Best estimate? 80 to 90 fighters. Professional equipment. Military-grade coordination. They knew exactly where we'd be and when we'd be there. I did the math.
12 operators against 90 fighters in pre-prepared positions.
That's not a mission, I said. That's an execution.
Yes, she said simply.
It was. What happened?
Chen was quiet again, staring at something I couldn't see. When she spoke, her voice had acquired the flat, professional tone I'd heard her use when describing combat scenarios.
We realized we were compromised about 30 minutes into the operation. Radio chatter we shouldn't have heard. Movement patterns that suggested the enemy knew our positions. Standard protocol would have been to abort, fall back to extraction point, reassess. But you didn't abort. Couldn't.
The extraction point was already compromised.
They'd positioned forces to cut off our retreat before we even realized we were walking into a trap.
She looked directly at me. Someone wanted to make sure none of us came home.
The implications hit me like a freight train.
Someone in your own command structure.
Someone with access to our operational details.
Someone who could modify our intelligence reports and adjust our support protocols without triggering security reviews.
Jesus Christ. It gets worse.
She stood again, began pacing with the restless energy of someone who'd spent months carrying dangerous information.
The fighters we encountered weren't Taliban. Not standard Taliban, anyway. They had training. Real training. Military discipline. Equipment that doesn't show up in cave systems without serious logistical support. What are you saying?
I'm saying someone provided them with more than just intelligence. Someone provided them with resources, training, coordination.
Someone turned a standard counterinsurgency operation into a private war.
The room felt smaller suddenly, like the walls were closing in.
Why? Why would anyone do that?
Chen stopped pacing, looked at me with something that might have been pity.
How much do you know about defense contracting? About the economics of prolonged military engagement? I shrugged. The basics. Companies provide services, government pays for them. Right. And what happens to those contracts when conflicts end? When regions stabilize? When there's no longer a military justification for massive expenditures? Understanding dawned like a cold sunrise. The money dries up.
Billions of dollars in contracts.
Tens of thousands of jobs. Entire industries built around the assumption that America will always have enemies that need killing.
She resumed her pacing.
But what happens when the enemies start losing? When local forces become competent enough to handle their own security? When success threatens the system that created it? You create new enemies.
Or you make sure the old ones don't die too quickly.
She stopped directly in front of my desk. Operation Ghostwalk wasn't about eliminating a high-value target network.
It was about eliminating a team that had become too effective at actually ending conflicts.
The words hit me like a physical blow.
Your team was too good at their job.
We'd spent 18 months systematically dismantling Taliban networks in 3 provinces.
Not just killing individual fighters, disrupting their command structure, cutting off their supply lines, turning local populations against them.
Real counterinsurgency work. The kind that actually ends wars instead of prolonging them. And someone didn't want the war to end. Someone very powerful.
Someone with the authority to modify operational parameters and the resources to turn local insurgents into a professional military force. I thought about the exercise 3 weeks ago.
About the systematic way she'd dismantled Patterson's team.
About the casual precision with which she'd described combat scenarios.
But you survived. 6 of us survived. Out of 12.
Her voice went completely flat. We fought our way out of that kill zone using tactics that aren't taught in any manual. Did things that would have been considered war crimes if we'd done them to anyone except people trying to kill us?
What kind of things?
She looked at me for a long moment, as if deciding whether I could handle the answer.
Psychological warfare.
Terror tactics. Making the enemy so afraid of us that they'd rather retreat than fight.
She sat down again.
We spent 4 months turning their own methods against them. Making them understand what it felt like to be hunted by something they couldn't see or hear or predict.
Like what you did to Patterson's team. What I did to Patterson's team was a demonstration. A teaching exercise.
Her expression hardened.
What we did in Afghanistan was survival. And the Distinguished Service Cross?
Is pending because the actions that earned it can't be officially acknowledged. Because admitting that we had to use those tactics means admitting that we were deliberately put in a position where those tactics were necessary. The pieces were coming together now, forming a picture that made my stomach turn.
Someone sent you and your team to die. When you survived, they couldn't officially recognize your actions without admitting their own complicity.
Worse than that, Chen said quietly. When we came back with evidence of what had really happened, communications intercepts, equipment serial numbers, intelligence that proved we'd been set up, we became a threat to people with the power to make threats disappear.
What kind of evidence?
The kind that implicates senior officers in deliberate mission compromise. The kind that suggests defense contractors were providing military-grade support to enemy forces. The kind that could bring down careers and cancel contracts worth billions of dollars. I felt like I was standing on the edge of an abyss, staring down into darkness that went deeper than I wanted to know.
Where's the evidence now? Chen smiled.
Not her usual small, dangerous smile.
Something sadder. More tired. Classified. Buried in files that require clearances I don't have access to.
Reviewed by boards composed of the same people implicated in the evidence itself.
And the other survivors? Transferred to different units. Different commands.
Spread across the globe where they can't coordinate stories or compare experiences.
She paused. 2 of them have died in training accidents since we returned.
The room went completely silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of night security making their rounds.
Why are you telling me this? I asked finally.
because in 6 months, my teaching assignment here ends. I'll receive new orders to a new unit where I'll be the only person who remembers what really happened in Afghanistan. Where I'll be isolated from anyone who might corroborate my story. And accidents happen. Training mishaps. Equipment failures. The kind of things that happen to people who know too much about operations that officially never occurred. She stood, moved toward the door. I'm telling you because someone needs to know. Someone who's not part of the system, who doesn't have a stake in keeping secrets. Someone who might ask questions if I suddenly disappear. Chen, wait. I stood, my mind racing. What am I supposed to do with this information? I'm just a teacher. I don't have access to investigation resources, or you don't have to do anything, she said. Just remember. Just know that if something happens to me, it won't be an accident. She turned the deadbolt, opened the door. And maybe think about what you're really teaching your students. Whether you're preparing them to serve their country or to serve the people who profit from war. She stepped into the hallway, then paused and looked back. That exercise 3 weeks ago? When I eliminated Patterson's team in complete darkness? That wasn't the scariest thing I learned in Afghanistan. What was? How easy it is to make good people disappear when they become inconvenient. She walked away, her footsteps echoing down the empty corridor with the measured cadence of someone who'd learned to move quietly through dangerous places. I stood in my doorway for a long time after she'd gone, staring down the hallway and thinking about the difference between classified information and true information. About defense contracts and prolonged conflicts and the economics of war. About a small woman who'd survived something that was supposed to kill her and was now teaching freshman tactics because someone needed her to stay quiet. The next morning, I arrived at the academy to find Lieutenant Sarah Chen's office empty. Her nameplate had been removed from the door. Her desk cleared of personal items. Her class schedules transferred to substitute instructors. When I asked Morrison about her sudden departure, he handed me a brief memo explaining that Lieutenant Chen had received emergency orders for immediate reassignment. Operational security prevented him from discussing details, but she'd left that morning for a new assignment at an undisclosed location. Everything okay? He asked, studying my face with the practiced eye of someone who'd spent 30 years reading people. Yes, sir, I said. Just wondering about her classes. Transition planning. Already handled. Patterson will resume his previous responsibilities until we can find a permanent replacement. I nodded, thanked him, walked back to my office in a daze. That evening, I tried calling the number listed in Chen's personnel file. Disconnected. I tried reaching her through official channels. No forwarding information available. I even tried contacting former colleagues at her previous unit. Lieutenant Sarah Chen, as far as the U.S. Army was concerned, had simply ceased to exist. 3 months later, I was reading the morning newspaper when a small item on page 6 caught my attention. Army officer killed in training accident Fort Bragg, North Carolina. A U.S. Army officer was killed yesterday during a routine training exercise when her parachute failed to deploy properly. Lieutenant Sarah M. Chen, 26, was conducting a standard airborne operation when the accident occurred. The incident is under investigation by Army safety officials. Chen, a Special Forces veteran with multiple combat deployments, was reportedly an experienced jumper with more than 200 successful parachute operations. The cause of the equipment failure remains unknown. She is survived by her parents in San Francisco and will be buried with full military honors at Arlington National Cemetery. I read the article 3 times before setting down the newspaper with hands that weren't quite steady. 200 successful jumps. Equipment failure. Cause unknown. The kind of accident that happens to people who know too much about operations that officially never occurred. That night, I called my wife. How was work today? She asked. Complicated, I said. Complicated how? I thought about Lieutenant Sarah Chen and her small, dangerous smile. About the way she'd moved through darkness like she'd been born in it. About defense contracts and prolonged conflicts and the difference between serving your country and serving the people who profit from war. About how easy it is to make good people disappear when they become inconvenient.
I think, I said slowly, I need to find a new job. What? Why? You love teaching.
I do love teaching, I admitted. But I'm starting to think I haven't been teaching the right things.
What do you mean?
I stared out the window at our safe, suburban street. At the manicured lawns and porch lights and the absolute certainty that no one hiding behind our garbage cans was planning to kill us. I mean, maybe it's time to start teaching students to ask questions about the wars they're supposed to fight, instead of just teaching them how to fight them.
There was a long pause on the other end of the line. This is about that new instructor, isn't it? The one you mentioned a few months ago.
Yeah, I said.
It is. What happened to her?
I thought about parachutes that fail after 200 successful jumps. About training accidents and equipment failures and the kind of investigations that always conclude everything was just terribly unfortunate coincidence.
She taught me something important, I said.
And then, she disappeared. Epilogue: I resigned from the academy 6 months later and took a teaching position at a small civilian college in Vermont. Nothing glamorous, just basic military history courses for undergraduates who wanted to understand the world they were inheriting.
I never saw Lieutenant Sarah Chen again.
Never found out what really happened in Afghanistan or whether the evidence she'd mentioned actually existed.
Never learned the names of the people powerful enough to turn a special forces operation into a deliberate massacre. But I remember her.
Remember her small, dangerous smile and the way she redefined everything I thought I knew about strength and weakness. Remember her teaching about fear as information and the difference between fighting fair and fighting smart. Most of all, I remember her final lesson, that sometimes the most dangerous enemy isn't the one shooting at you from across a battlefield.
Sometimes it's the one giving you orders from behind a desk.
In my new classroom, when I teach about military ethics and the responsibility of soldiers to question unlawful orders, I always think about a woman who was 5'2" and could make herself invisible in complete darkness. Who spent 18 months being too good at ending wars and paid the price for her competence.
My students think I'm teaching them about historical events and abstract principles.
I'm really teaching them about Lieutenant Sarah Chen and the difference between classified information and true information. About the courage it takes to survive not just combat, but the people who profit from it. About why some stories can only be told by those who paid in blood to learn them. And about why those stories, once told, make the storytellers disappear. She was right, of course.
About everything.
The most effective warriors are often the smallest ones.
Fear is information. Combat isn't about strength, it's about understanding.
And, sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is teach others to question the wars they're asked to fight.
Even if it costs you everything. Especially then.
In memory of Lieutenant Sarah M. Chen and all the other ghosts who haunt the machinery of war. Their silence speaks louder than our words.